The following events are derived from multiple sources: first-hand accounts, eyewitness statements, police records, physical evidence, and journals pieced together by investigative experts. Due to the nature of the incidents, the resulting crimes, and the psychological condition of the survivors, be assured that anything you hear that borders on the supernatural has been taken into account with the utmost consideration. Warning: this video may disturb you. Mid-June 2016. James Young, Emily Ames, Marcus Drake, and Trisha George drove down to the old firehouse just outside the city limits of their main home. James's aunt gave the group permission to check out the building. Since her husband passed away, the firehouse had been in her possession, which she rented out to a family for storage. But after a few decades of prompt payment, the money suddenly stopped. In fact, all word from the family ceased. That was almost 3 years ago now, and everything in storage remained untouched. So when James mentioned he was looking for props for a university film project about a struggling private detective, she told him to go right ahead and take a look. As far as she was concerned, the firehouse and everything in it was hers. Now, his. The building was run down, yet the foundations were stable enough to keep the roof from caving in. The further in the four friends ventured, the more assorted the objects became. At first, cabinets and racks of clothes lined the walls. Upstairs, light fixtures, lawn ornaments, and various clocks and knick-knacks were stacked. Curiosity drew them to the basement, where they found the most alien artifacts yet. Statues and trophies, pottery and scrolls filled with strange writing, jewelry, paintings, even some kind of crypt. Whilst inspecting the curious items, all were startled by the cry of Marcus in the far corner. He had discovered a dusty old mannequin, or so he'd thought. Upon further investigation, it appeared to be some kind of life-sized doll, but even more unusual than that. Its face was made of china, with the expression of mania, chipped and broken down its left side. But the rest of its limbs were made of differing materials and design. There were 3 others behind a shawl, one leaning against the wall with an ambivalent expression, a third wedged tightly in the corner concealing its terror-filled demeanor, and the last face down on the floor with a face of rage, staring deep into the depths of the earth. Each one differed from the other in terms of design, except of course for the china faces. It was clear as to why Marcus screamed in fright. The dolls were quite unnerving, and to have any one fall on you would have made anyone jump. James, Emily, and Trisha agreed that they would be perfect additions to the Halloween bash they were also planning on campus, even if they wouldn't fit in with the tone of the film. They were perfectly freaky to pass up. Marcus agreed, under protest, as well as under the condition they be kept at James's house. Since there wasn't enough room at James's, he only kept one. Trisha also agreed to keep one. Marcus, reluctantly, kept 2 in his basement under lock and key. They spent the next 2 days filming scenes of their short film in the Forest Reserve, several hours' drive from home. The parents of all students as well were on holidays of their own. However, reports from neighbors of each stated that they were unaware they had departed, as signs of life were glimpsed throughout the day. At the Young residence, witnesses reported brief sightings of someone moving past the windows, and one neighbor felt eyes staring at them as they jogged by. The neighbors of Trisha George would later report loud moaning and wailing coming from the bedroom, and assumed she was in emotional turmoil. Yet, upon attempting to make contact with Trisha, the noises would stop, and no one would answer. Finally, in the late hours of the evening, one neighbor of Marcus Drake awoke to the sound of loud banging and yelling coming from his neighbor's house, and assumed the young man was watching television or playing video games loudly. The noises slowly died down over the course of several hours, and the neighbor went back to sleep, disgruntled at the police for not responding to his 911 call. When the group arrived back into town, however, they did find it strange that no one commented on their absence. The evening of Saturday the 18th, they gathered at Marcus's to wind down after a busy few days. They'd been somewhat productive and covered a lot of the shots required for their outdoor scenes. They relaxed over making future plans to film, with Marcus making jokes in character, and James and Emily remarking to themselves that they might spend an extra night out alone to enjoy the sanctuary the woods offered. After a few hours, the four acquired more alcohol and sent Marcus, as host, to fetch more from the downstairs fridge. Upon returning, he remarked on the strange scrapings he'd seen on the door. When asked if he'd been robbed and if anything was missing from the house, Marcus shook his head and added that the marks had been made from inside the basement. Over the course of the next week, strange and unusual events surrounding the friends slowly began to mount, building to a head. The details are scattered, mostly from word of mouth between several of the victims to the survivors of the horrors to come. Here is what we know. The four students spent their time separated, relaxing before their next big outing. A week or two of saving and gathering supplies was all they required. James and Emily were spending more and more time at his house. Their relationship was becoming more serious, and the pair were celebrating their growing love in the usual way young adults do. And when Emily left for work or returned to her house, James felt especially alone. But now, that loneliness had taken on a new element. Isolation. It was no longer sadness at her absence, but the unshakable, frightening feeling that a presence now watched his every move. He was always on edge, and it was easy to pinpoint why. One morning, after Emily left, James had retired to his room to watch a movie. Upon entering, he saw that the closet door was open and the doll had toppled out. This wasn't particularly unusual, until he noticed that it was wearing one of Emily's sweaters. He shook off the silly notion in his mind, removed the item of clothing, and propped Mania, as they called it, back into the closet. But these encounters weren't to end, and they only escalated from here. Sometimes, James would catch it sitting at his work desk. Other times, he would wake up at night to what he believed was heavy breathing. What concerned him most was how Mania would be wearing an item of Emily's clothing almost every time, prompting him to confront her. She refused all accusations due to the lack of evidence of her involvement. Even so, James was left uneasy, and it certainly took a toll on their relationship. On the afternoon of the 24th of June, James and Marcus met up at Marcus's home. While there, James mentioned the strange events at his house surrounding the doll they had brought back from the firehouse. The stress of feeling like he was being watched, the clothes, the breathing, it all came pouring out. And when he was done, James expected to be met with apprehension, criticism from his friend. But that never came. Marcus, instead, regarded his friend with an air of understanding. And that scared him more. It was then that Marcus began recounting his own horrific ordeals during the course of the week. Marcus, it appeared, hadn't slept for days, because every night he would hear noises from inside the basement. He would stand at the top of the staircase and stare down, a baseball bat in hand, waiting for something to break the door down. He dared not enter. He was far too afraid for that. During the day, Marcus felt like he could rest. But then he would hear more noises, this time from within the house itself. He would search every room, only to discover missing items, pens, picture frames, cutlery. This continued for a day or two, until he started finding tiny figures hidden around the house. Small, doll-like creatures made from the stolen materials. To discover the identity of who had been doing this, Marcus decided he would wait until the next encounter. Yesterday, he found his opportunity. He heard a clatter from the kitchen and ran to investigate. Marcus caught a glimpse of a shadow fleeing through the rooms and pursued it until he arrived at the basement. Tentatively, Marcus approached the door and found it unlocked. Whoever had done this did it from the inside. Marcus entered the basement and searched around. The light wasn't working, so he left the door propped open to let some light in. The room was silent and still, the air stale. And yet, he sensed a presence. Upon deciding to leave, Marcus fell over onto the floor. Dazed, it took him a moment to regain his senses, but in that time he could swear he heard two things. One was footsteps. The second, and more disturbing sound, was a loud, guttural yell of anger. In the seconds it took Marcus to turn around, he heard a crash and saw the two dolls, Rage and Ambivalence, frozen on the floor in a deadlock. Marcus fled and barricaded the basement door with more than just a lock. Sure enough, when James investigated, planks of wood were nailed to the door. It was clear what they needed to do. Marcus went to the garage and grabbed a canister of kerosene, returning to James, who had just finished unbarricading the door. They were going to find the dolls and burn them. They entered cautiously, keeping their eyes glued to the darkness surrounding them. The torch was only so good at conjuring light, dark shapes looming from the blackness. They came to the rack they used to store their costumes, and noticed that one of the hangers was empty. It was Marcus's detective clothes. A creaking to their side drew their attention, and there, sitting on a stool, wearing the trench coat and hat, was the doll of Ambivalence, staring at them. Ever so slowly, it raised its arm and gestured the boys to remain quiet. But Marcus was shaking so much that he dropped the canister of kerosene, echoing loudly throughout the basement. That's when they heard the howl. Suddenly, the pair were knocked to the floor, causing James to drop his torch. It shattered nearby the pooling kerosene and ignited it. Rage towered before them, and metallically snarled like a wild animal. It leapt at them, but was grabbed by its brother. Ambivalence waved them away, and both Marcus and James ascended the stairs into the house. Before the two could catch their breath, Ambivalence was launched through the doorway and crashed into the living room. Rage tore past them, flames dancing on its body, and fought with its brother. James and Marcus fled the house and watched as it went up in flames. Police recovered James and Tricia from the scene and took them in for questioning. Their statements were taken, and they were to be charged with 2 counts of murder, given the incredulity of their story. Agents from our institute took over the investigation, suppressed it, and removed all evidence of the event having taken place. James and Tricia gave their final statements on the matter before being humanely euthanized. The parents of all 4 students were told their children died in a fatal car accident that night. There have been small traces as to the whereabouts of the doll-like creatures cropping up across America. Resources are, however, stretched thin enough amongst our facilities to properly investigate the matter. Given long enough, however, it is feared one, if not all, could properly infiltrate its way into society and become almost indistinguishable from a regular person. Caution is advised. They know of us now, and they may kill when threatened by our presence. Designated Class Euclid. These proceedings are closed.